Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Stevens. I am the COO of the African Mini Grid Developers Association, for those who weren't with us yesterday. I wanted to thank everyone for their participation in the last two-day event, looking at how mini grids, looking at the importance of mini grids across the continent. As we close this two-day conference, I'd like to sincerely express my appreciation to all of you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us in this conference. The decade of the mini grid, accelerating innovation to address the energy trilemma in sub-Saharan Africa. We've dedicated this time to raising awareness and facilitating knowledge and exchange on the issues that are hampering the growth of mini grids in the sector. On energy demand, technology, production trends, investment, and the state of the overall market, and to look at the mini grid developments between innovators, co-funding partners, and all of our programs. To the panelists, I truly appreciate your engagement, your willingness to share your experiences, and your contribution to this work. It's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you to everyone else for your interesting questions and participation that has helped make this conference a success. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do this in person. I think as we heard over the course of the last 2 days, mini grids are the foundation for reaching most of the SDG goals. And in order to be able to do that, we need to leverage all aspects of the energy ecosystem in order to make sure that we are seeing success not just in energy, but in education, healthcare, water and sanitation, and logistics and infrastructure. And this workshop has been a step in proactively coming to grips with what the mini grid sector needs in order to scale. And from a technological perspective and the financial landscape, and the future of the sector. Hearing from the panelists' discussions and the audience's different questions, it's clear that we all understand the urgency with which we need to reach SDG 7 and engage rural electrification across Africa. However, there are still important areas that both investors, donors, and governments have that will affect the contribution of these goals. I think, as you all can see, this conference has explored the diverse challenges that are hindering the mini grid sector and limiting the achievement of scale and the solutions to overcome them. As we close this session, I'm encouraging you to keep doing the great work that you're all doing in your role in ensuring that mini grid development is successful in alleviating the energy dilemmas in sub-Saharan Africa. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you some key takeaways that I have gained from listening to the panelists over the last 2 days. I think one of the key threads that went through the entire conference is the idea of how do we actually finance and subsidize electrification. In the last panel, Sam Dubey said, I think a really pertinent question, which is, who do we electrify and how? And related to that are, how do we subsidize those connections, and how do we ensure that the regulatory structures are appropriate for that electrification? The pricing for energy is incredibly political, and the regulations are about rules that are mathematical. So there's a translation issue between how do we finance the sector and how do we ensure that their consumers are not the ones bearing the cost burden for electrification. We need to make subsidies and tariffs politically acceptable across the market. But in addition to the subsidy issue that seems to always overtake conversations about mini grids, there was quite a lot of optimism about the state of the sector and the directions that we're going to go. Overall, I think thinking about technology and how technology and data are interwoven between all of the aspects of not only mini grids, but the energy ecosystem overall, and the importance of how mini grids have been able to leverage innovative technological solutions that are specific for the mini grid market in order to maximize returns for themselves and investors, but also to ensure that the quality and service power that their consumers are receiving is appropriate and is actually some of the best on the continent. To my colleagues as some of my colleagues and panelists mentioned yesterday, there are things that the on-grid utilities can do better than mini-grids and vice versa. And ultimately, we all have to work together, both the mini-grids and the traditional utilities, in order to ensure that we're actually reaching SDG 7. And the more that we approach that relationship as something that is competitive and not collaborative, the harder it's going to be to reach those goals. It's clear that it's also clear on the financial landscape side that subsidies are not going to be sufficient in order to reach our electrification goals, and that there's an array of commercial solutions that are going to focus on sustainable business models for the private sector and for electrification more broadly. I think, as Emily said in the last panel, what we need is subsidy mechanisms that donors are pooling into, but it's also clear that we need guarantee structures, and we need infrastructure level investment that would allow us to scale across the sector. And then I think one of the really important things that came through on the conversations about POU is how rapidly we're expecting productive use of energy to actually influence consumption. And several of those panelists reiterated an idea that's about habit over time, and the idea that we need to look at a longer term horizon to shift people's habits, both on cooking and energy consumption, in order to see gradual change in the market. And that gradual change will radically improve the business models for mini grids. But in the interim, we need to find ways to fill that viability gap. I think the other thing that I'd like to just point out or reiterate that came through across the panelists is that so much of the mini grid business model is consumer facing, and it's about ensuring positive consumer interactions and making sure that the consumer is the center of the business model. And that's something that will continue to drive this model, both on the productive use of appliance and appliance financing, but also on the energy consumption and ensuring that rural Africans have quality service of power, and that they will continue to have quality service of power over the long term. I think there are I missed probably many things that were really important across the last 2 days, but I think that the group of people who were presented today and all of you who are listening make up a community of people dedicated to not only the alleviation of energy poverty, but collaboration in our approach to addressing these goals over the future. And as many of the panelists and speakers over the last 2 days have said, we're not on track to meet SDG 7, but I think there's also a recognition in this group that everyone here, panelists, participators, and the audience is committed to trying to reach those goals. And so as we close out this 2 days, I'd like to thank you all for your active participation as we look forward to this, together to a future of collaboration and electrifying Africa. I also want to say a huge thank you to Carbon Trust and the Energy Capital team for the work on putting this conference together. And a huge thank you to our CEO, Aaron, who has spearheaded a large part of this conference. And one last big thank you to all of the panelists who made this possible and your amazing contribution and thoughts on the future of the energy sector. Thank you all, and we very much look forward to working with you over the course of the next few years to see us reach SDG 7 and full electrification.